topic of sovereignty. Always a fun topic, always very polarizing topic anymore. We're going to go through it in two parts. The first part, we're just going to talk about sovereignty in general, and then the second part is where we'll get into some more of the specifics that people like to ask about what is sovereignty and what are the impacts of sovereignty. So if we don't hit your topic today that you have a question on, wait till next week. Let's see if we have it, and then if we don't hit it next week, then just bring it up. We'll talk about it. It's not a big deal. But this week, what we want to look at is a few things that, for me, were kind of a big deal. When I heard sovereignty, I heard election. I heard predestination. So it was always God's sovereignty was about whether God was sovereign or whether there was man's free will. And for me, that was a very limited scope. And when I found out what sovereignty is so much more. Sovereignty is pretty huge. What does it mean? And we'll talk about some of these quotes here to begin with because they're good. What does it mean to be sovereign? We're watching a show where India got its independence in 1947. What does that mean? We have Independence Day we have Independence Day on July 4th.
You're a sovereign state.
Meaning?
You're self-governed.
Self-governed.
Is that right? Self-governed.
Well, like we have tribal nations within the United States, and they are sovereign nations. That
Good.
means that they can create their own laws and do their own little thing within their group, but yet they are still part of the larger United States, and so there's certain things that they can do that it only affects them.
Right. So sovereignty is the idea of, if you had to put that into a nutshell, what would you claim?
So the book just says absolute and supreme power in reference to God, him being the supreme king of creation.
Sure. But what does that mean to you? Put it in your own words, not what the book says. See what I'm saying? Because I can tell you what the book says. I wrote the book. What does it mean to you? How do you guys, when you hear sovereign, what picture comes to your mind? The sovereign nations within a nation.
Complete and full trust in that God who is absolute and supremely everything.
Good.
All-knowing, all pieces.
Okay, so those are different attributes, but what does sovereign mean? Give me a good definition of sovereign. This is tough. This isn't a joke. What does it mean?
Could it mean independent of any outside control, but control over everything you have over everything?
Yeah. So that's actually probably one of the best, and you were right on it too. It's the idea, self-government was actually pretty good. It's the idea of self-determination. I can decide what I want to do, and I have the power to fulfill it. Does it do any good to decide what you want to do if you have absolutely no way of doing it? Of course not. Sovereignty is the idea that I have the independence, I have the power, and I have absolutely nothing holding me back from doing exactly what I want to do. That's the idea of sovereignty. So when we talk about a sovereign nation, right, why was it a big deal for the United States to declare independence? So that they can decide their own tax laws, their own religious policies, their own whatever that mattered to the founding fathers at the time was what exactly the United States wanted to declare. They did not want to be ruled over by the King of England. Right? No taxation without representation. What was that all about? Do you remember? We want, as of 13 colonies, we want to have a say in the taxation policy. Okay? That was the freedom. That was a declaration of sovereignty. Does that make sense? And that's a big deal. Now, that also was a very big deal what the United States did, and it was a sign of the times. It wasn't necessarily unique to the United States, although we were one of the first. The way that they rejected the rule of a king. Okay? The way that they said no taxation without representation is actually a fight against sovereignty to a degree. I'm willing to talk about that a little bit more. But if you look at some of these quotes at the beginning of the chapter, they're really insightful. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple with glory. Now, we talked about this with holiness, and Nate went through a lot of it, the holy, holy, holy. But if you take this first phrase, Isaiah has something to say right in the first couple phrases. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne. Why would he say it like that?
Because
Did he have his eyes on the king before that? And then when the king died, the king wasn't there, so he had to look to God.
Okay, that's true. But even more than that, think about it in terms of sovereignty.
well, King Uzziah was the king, so he was the sovereign
Uh-huh.
over
He was the rule.
he was the rule.
He was the rule.
Yeah, and when he
Let me ask you a question. Did the king really die? Did the king really die?
the king,
The king
no,
of kings.
Yeah.
king of kings, no.
Do you see what's happening here with Isaiah? This is Isaiah's setup. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the king seated on his throne. Yes, the earthly king passed away. The King of Kings, the heavenly king, was still seated on his throne like he always has been. Nothing has changed, right? He is unaffected by all these things that turn me around in circles. Revelation 4, it's a great scene. And behold, I'm going to pull out a few things out of this. There's more to it than that. But behold, a throne set in heaven. This is what John saw. And behold, a throne set in heaven, and one sat on the throne, and he who sat there was like jasper and a sardius stone in appearance, and there was a rainbow around his throne in appearance like an emerald. And you can kind of get this picture that he's basically looking at something that he can't really describe, and he's doing his best to try to grasp whatever he can imagine to try to just put this picture that he sees, and he's trying for your benefit to try to describe. Whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who sits on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. Okay. A.W. Pink has a great description of it. Subject to none, influenced by none, absolutely independent. God does as he pleases, only as he pleases, always as he pleases. None can thwart him, none can hinder him. So his own word expressly declares, My counsel shall stand, and I will do all my good pleasure. He doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand. Divine sovereignty means that God is God in face as well as in name, and he is on the throne of the universe, directing all things, working all things after the counsel of his own will. So this is what sovereignty is. Sovereignty is the ability, the right, the inherent quality of God to direct, to decide, and to implement things according to his will. Do we have sovereignty?
As people? Are we to self-govern ourselves? Yeah. I would say yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's why as a nation, and that's why there's people that don't want to come to Jesus, because they don't want to be governed.
Right.
They want to govern themselves. I'm fighting this
Can we
myself.
govern ourselves? You say yes.
Yeah.
How you said no.
I would say that there are things in our life that we can decide and control,
Uh-huh.
and that we do have power in, when we, are raising infants. I mean,
Yeah.
we have that a kind of a sovereignty over
Right.
them. But are we sovereign in among ourselves? Absolutely not.
Right. So is there an ultimate sovereignty and a delegated sovereignty? And that's what we're going to take on this morning. What is the difference? What does it look like when God does things? What does it look like when we do things? Because do we have some amount of sovereignty? Yes, because God has decided to give us some amount of sovereignty. You will make your own decisions. And if he didn't, otherwise it wouldn't make any sense for him to judge us if we had no right to make our own decisions. What would he judge us over? Here's the things that I decided you did in your life. Well, that's not very fair, right? But if he gives us some amount of sovereignty, and I'm not going to solve the mystery of how that works together, so don't bother to ask, but there's a decision that we have to make. We have decisions to make in our lives. We have things that we can do or not do. And those decisions are what bring us to judgment in the end at the end of time, right? So there is a certain amount of sovereignty, a certain amount, but God is that doesn't disqualify God's sovereignty, which is His by nature. Okay, so this gets pretty tough. All right. So what does this kingship entail? What does it look like? And this is where we want to spend a couple of minutes here looking at this. First, there's a couple things that we're going to look at. And there's more you can probably add to this, but we're going to look at a couple things specifically. First, He is king over everything. He sits over creation. He rules it. He has no equal. Everything He chooses to do is done in absolute fashion. He has nothing that stops Him. Okay? Everything that happens in creation marches to the beat of His drum. Does that make sense? So if we look at this, before we get too far from Scripture, look at some of these verses here on page 149. Psalm 103, the Lord has established His throne in heaven, and His kingdom rules over all. Isaiah 40, you're going to see that coming up a lot in chapters Isaiah 40 through 50, because in that section of Isaiah, Israel has now been, or is going to be, exiled. So Israel, the southern kingdom, is gone, and Judah remains. Isaiah comes in, he's preaching, and he's telling them, this is judgment. Judgment is upon you. Things are going to happen. You are going to see this erode until you're gone too. And so he starts to tell them, what you need to worry about is who God is. And then he gets to the point where he says, you can't stop this. This is going to happen. You will be destroyed. But make no mistake. God is still on His throne, and He still lives to save, and He still will rescue us, and His arm is strong. Just because your nation falls doesn't mean you, Israelites, need to be abandoned. And that was kind of the lesson of Isaiah. In Isaiah 40 or 50, he starts comparing himself to all these idols that Israel keeps chasing after. Do you want to chase after the Assyrians? Do you want to chase after military might? Do you want to chase after other gods? And the reason that he keeps coming back to these other gods was very simple. In the ancient Near Eastern culture, you would look at the strength of a god was revealed by the military prowess of his people. Okay? So if you ruled Baal and another country came and destroyed you, what did that tell you about Baal? He wasn't, well, he may have been strong, but there was somebody else that was stronger. Does that make sense? So now Isaiah is coming to Judah, and he's saying, you will be overthrown, but God still remains on His throne. Why was that counterintuitive?
Because His people were going to be taken away into captivity, but yet God did not change who He was.
Right. Because God is not less God because you, Israel, are wiped from the planet. That's not the way it works. Yes, that's what everybody thinks, but that's actually not the way it works. So he spends chapter after chapter revealing His hand, prophesying, explaining what happened before, what happens next, and saying, this is all from my hand. Nothing can stop me. And when I say that you are gone, you're gone. But that doesn't change me. It doesn't change who I am. So come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. Right? Isaiah 55, come and buy drink. Come and eat real food. So he says, come to me. I'm still here. I'm the rock. Okay? So you're going to see in this chapter and in the next, Isaiah 40, lots of passages from Isaiah 40 and 40 through 50. Psalm 135, for I know that the Lord is great and our God is above all gods. Whatever the Lord pleases, He does in heaven and in earth and the seas and all the deep places. Romans 11, for from Him and through Him and to Him are all things, to whom be glory forever. And finally in Isaiah 45, you can see at the end that to me every knee shall bow and every tongue shall take an oath. This is it. I am the King. I am the King. I rule over all. My dictates, my decrees outweigh everyone else's. There is no one that's going to stop me from doing what I want to do. Okay? This is going to be challenging because we have to take in this idea of sin. We're going to talk about that next week. What happened with sin? What happens when we look around this world and things are going so wrong? Does God mean for that to happen? And that'll be the challenge, okay? Secondly, he's free. His authoritative rule, there is no one that he is answerable to, right? And this is where the idea of limited sovereignty comes into place for us. We have been given the choice as parents of how we're going to raise our kids. We've been given the idea of how we're going to vote. All these kind of things that we have decisions on. But it's all limited, right? I run a tech group for my company. I can make a lot of decisions, but I'm not in a vacuum. I'm responsible to our board. I'm responsible to our CEO. I'm responsible to other people that I have to give an account to. Okay? I have some sovereignty. I can make decisions, but not ultimate sovereignty in which nobody questions my decisions. In fact, lots of people question my decisions, right? Same thing, but when we come to God, now we're saying that God has no one that he has to give an account to. He decides and he does. Period. No one else. Okay? A.W. Pink, we affirm that he is under no rule or law outside of his own will and nature, that God is a law unto himself, and that he is under no obligation to give an account to his matters to any. Now that's a big deal. And we're going to talk about a good picture here in Daniel where God graciously takes Nebuchadnezzar through this. Okay? And this brings up this idea that he is answerable to no one. Look in Isaiah 43, verse 10. You are my witnesses, says the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me, and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, nor shall there be after me. I, even I, am the Lord, and besides me there is no Savior. I have declared and saved, I have proclaimed, and there was no foreign God among you. Therefore you are my witnesses, says the Lord, that I am God. Indeed, before the day was, I am he, and there is no one who can deliver out of my hand. I work, and who will reverse it? And then the next chapter. Thus says the Lord, the Redeemer of the King, the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first, and I am the last. Besides me there is no God. And who can proclaim as I do? Okay? Who can decide? Who can say what's true? Who can declare where things are going? Then let him declare it and set it in order for me. Since I appointed the ancient people and the things that are coming and shall come, let them show these to them. Do not fear nor be afraid. Have I not told you from that time and declared it? You are my witnesses. Is there a God besides me? Indeed, there is no other rock. I know not one. And in Psalm 35 and 115, whatever the Lord pleases, he does. Now, you've heard it before with the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Lucy comes to Beaver, and Beaver says, it's a lion. She says, it's a lion. I mean, that's kind of scary. Is he safe? And what did she mean by safe? For those of you that read the story.
Approachable.
Close. Is he tame? And what does tame mean? What does it mean to be tame? Because?
He's approachable. He's
Trained.
Good. Keep going. He's trained, meaning
he's not going to harm you.
he's not going to harm you because
He's tame.
he's afraid of you, because he obeys you, because he knows that you rule. And Beaver says, safe? He's not safe, but he's good. Look at these verses and tell me why that matters. Right? He does whatever he pleases. I proclaim it, and who's going to stop me? Who's going to tell me otherwise? Who's going to restrain my hand? If God's not good, and these verses are true, does that freak you out a little bit? Right? That's what this is. This is why sovereignty matters so much. This is why we make such a big deal about the whole character of God. Because if God is sovereign and yet not good, then we're under this terrible, wrathful God who goes up and down, and you never know exactly what you're going to get. But if he's holy, and just, he's going to do the things that are right. And if he's good, he's going to watch out for us. And so you see all these different things wrapping together. And then sovereignty is the tape that makes it all great. Because if he knew everything and he was good, but he's not sovereign, he's not capable, he doesn't have the ability to bring to pass his desires, then it doesn't matter how good he is. He can't do it. But if he's good and he's sovereign, now versus like neither height nor depth nor angels nor principalities nor things present nor things to come can separate us from the love of God, now that matters, right? If he's not sovereign, then that verse is wishful thinking. Okay? Make sense? All right. So we're going to get into Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel, the book of Daniel. It has all kinds of stuff that are hard to understand. The first 4 chapters, however, are actually fairly straightforward. If you're interested, as an aside, Rick Anderson, he's a pastor from a church in California, was here about a year ago. He went through the first 6 chapters of Daniel. Fantastic. Jump online, listen to him. He is a gifted teacher. I'm going to do my poor man's imitation. So, what was happening in the book of Daniel? For those of you who have read it before, what's the historical background of the book? Mm-hmm. It's right about the beginning of the Babylonian captivity. And it actually extends through the Babylonian captivity into the Medo-Persians. But the very beginning of the book, who is Babylon? What's that? It was a wicked kingdom.
Wasn't it like the ruling kingdom
Mm-hmm.
for the whole known world, basically, at that time?
Oh, the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a ruling kingdom of the Middle East. Now, what made them special? Babylon's kind of a unique sort of people, especially biblically, which is why you see their name coming up in Revelation so much. So who...
Isn't that where the tower, is it because of the tower?
The tower, the Hanging Gardens of Babel, actually, of Babylon. It was one of the 7 wonders. True. The Tower of Babel actually was a few thousand years before.
Was it? Okay.
But it was close. It's the same name. There's a reason for that. That's a different story. Who ruled in the area before this? Who ruled in the area before the Babylonians?
Was it the really evil king that thought that came to Hezekiah and said, "Why are
Yes.
you trusting God?"
That was actually not the king. It was actually the head of his army. But yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But he was the king of Assyria.
Good. Assyria.
And I can't think of his name. What was his name? It was.
I don't remember.
could look it up.
So Assyria was the ruling power. And then out of nowhere come a people called the Chaldeans. And if you're interested, go read Habakkuk. Habakkuk says there's this little country that would be the equivalent. Assyria would be the United States, and the Chaldeans would be like Puerto Rico. Okay, that's the picture. And Habakkuk says, and God says to Habakkuk, I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans. And they're going to be as fierce people that are going to come and rule the entire area. And Habakkuk says, what? What are you, them? Number one, they're nothing. And second, they're pagans. And he has to go through this whole issue on again, who God is, what God is all about. So, well, guess what happens? The Chaldeans become the Babylonians, and the Babylonians destroy Assyria like it was nothing. And they proceed to take over most of that Middle Eastern Mesopotamian valley. They take over Israel, they knock off Judah, they wipe out Assyria, Nineveh, and they just go ahead and rule in a way that's very unique. Nebuchadnezzar by himself ruled over an area so completely and so comprehensively and so richly that you're going to see it was sovereignly designed. Okay? It wasn't random. It wasn't on accident. Nebuchadnezzar was sovereignly chosen to do a certain sovereignly chosen task. Okay? And that's the backdrop we have. In 586 BC, the Babylonians come through. Judah finally uses their last trick, and they're wiped out. And even more than that, what else was done in Judah, in Jerusalem? What specifically happened in Judah at that time in 586? That was such a big deal. It was a watershed moment in Israel's history.
Wasn't that where, I don't know what the dates were, but I know Nebuchadnezzar came in and he
Yes.
destroyed all of Judah.
Okay.
He burned down the buildings. I mean, they
Keep going.
messed with him so much that he finally said, I am done, and he came in and he destroyed buildings. He
What buildings did he destroy?
The temple.
The temple.
He destroyed everything, including the temple.
Yeah, he was.
And he carried it all away.
The Babylonians were nasty, very, very nasty people. The way that they would, after they conquered you, to be able to do population control to make sure you wouldn't rise up, you know what they used to do? Strip you down, make you run through a plain. They take 2 horses on either side. That was one of the reasons why they were superior. They take 2 horses with a net in between them, and they would literally just run up behind you, grab you in the net, and then start whipping it around so you're just rolling around in the net on the rock until you're dead. That's what they do. Okay? So this is a nasty, nasty people, but they were very effective in their military technique, and they took over things like a tornado. And one of the things they came through is they destroyed the temple. Now, we just talked about what the attitude was if your God was overthrown. So what did the Babylonians do to Israel that was very vividly picturesque? I just destroyed your temple.
They took their sacred vessels and put in a pagan feast and such.
Well, they destroyed the temple altogether, unlike others. Okay? And that tells you something about your God, right? My God is better than your God. Your God cannot defend his temple. I just destroyed it by the power of my gods, right? That's the picture. Now all these people are led into captivity, what's left of them, and they're sitting there saying, the temple's gone, my home's gone, the city's gone, the priests are all gone, the kings have been killed. What picture does that have for you of these people?
Devastation.
There was only a few people left. So here's what the Babylonians started figuring out that the Assyrians didn't quite figure out, and the Romans actually probably did the best. What happens when you go and conquer an area, and then you go to the next area to conquer, then you go to the next area to conquer? Do you have a multiplying army? It's not like a video game, right, where you just increase production by clicking a couple times.
No, your army gets thinner and thinner.
Your army gets thinner and thinner. So what do you have to do to be able to retain the lands that you conquered?
Leave a portion of your army in each city.
Right, but you're getting thinner and thinner, so what are you going to do?
Recruit the ones that you conquered.
Figure out how to get the ones that you conquered to be loyal to you so that they don't rebel against you. And to do that, one of the things that Babylon did, do you see why Israel was given some sovereignty under Roman rule? Because the Romans were masters of this, and it served them for almost 1,000 years. The Babylonians started figuring this out. And so what they did was they killed all the nobles, they killed all the priests, and they killed the adults. And they took the noble children of the nobles, and they brought them to Babylon. And what do?
You train them up.
You train them up, meaning what?
It means that you give them your values, you give them your language, you indoctrinate them.
You indoctrinate them. So you give them new names. You give them food, really good food. And you start teaching them about your gods, and you start teaching them your language, Aramaic being the language of this time. And so what happens to those kids?
You strip them of their identity and give them a new one.
They start to think good things come from Babylon. Good things come from Nebuchadnezzar. Good things come from, and they start associating those things with that. And then what's their memories of their hometown? Destruction, death, my parents are gone, the temple's gone, I got nothing left, so I might as well go ahead and become Babylonian. And pretty soon, they're loyal to you. Now you go put them back where they were, and now you've got your problem solved. I don't have to have a full army there because I've got people that are loyal. It takes a little while, but it works.
Except for Daniel.
So
Shadrach,
this is really what makes Daniel unique in Daniel 1:8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. So this goes beyond just the fact that he didn't want to eat the king's foods. He refused to take part in this indoctrination. By God's grace, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or that's actually their
that's their
Aramaic names.
Yeah.
Those 4 men, and there's more, but those 4 men are highlighted here in the book of Daniel as refusing to be able to give in, of staying faithful to their God even in the midst of this whirlwind of a trial that they were going through. These are young men, probably either early teens, maybe a little bit younger, maybe a little bit older, but right about that age, right? And we sit there and coddle them, and we talk about how they have to have these kind of programs in school. And here's these men whose parents have been killed, probably before their eyes, now taken to a completely foreign land and told, this is the way things are now. And you may never go home. Because guess what? Daniel never made it home. Well, he did. Actually, he talked to Daniel. He talked to Darius. And Daniel's fascinating. If you ever look at Daniel, he served through Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar's son, and into the Medo-Persian Empire. And he keeps doing this. And every one of these kings that comes, guess what they find? This guy, Daniel, I don't know where he's from. I don't particularly care where he's from. He's such a wise man. I want him on my staff. And he keeps getting elevated to chief of staff for every king of every conquering nation that comes in. And he's like a rock. The guy just never moves. He's a constant line. You see, oh, this is the nations that go like this. And here's Daniel. Daniel's line, just straight. Never fails, never flinches, never promises, never over-promises, just delivers what God has given him. Fascinating man. All right, so chapter 2 is where we're going to pick up. Daniel 2:20. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. In this dream, there's a statue. Okay? And in the statue, he can't figure it out. So he says, I don't get it. Give me all the wise men. Tell me what this dream is about. You guys know the way the world works. You guys are masters of creation. Tell me this dream and tell me what it means. And they can't do that. He's going to kill them all. They come and get Daniel because Daniel's this lone prophet from Israel that doesn't matter anymore, but it's a last-ditch effort. Daniel prays, and he's given the meaning. And this is what he prays in Daniel 2:20. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and he raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. Now, we're not going to go into this because it's a rich prayer, but you can see some of the things that are being highlighted. Blessed be the name of God, for wisdom and might are his. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and he raises up kings. He decides who's going to win. Somebody asked years ago, and they asked me, are you saying that God cares about the Bronco game? That just seems so beneath him. It just seems so, such a minor thing. Yeah, you're right. But everything marches to the beat of God's drum. There is nothing that happens without his decision, his wisdom, his say-so. Okay? The ways of men, the ways of the clouds, the way the eclipse, all that kind of stuff happens because God said it will happen. And he makes it so. Sometimes he uses natural means, and as we'll see, sometimes he overrides the natural ways to do things the way he wants to do them. He is truly sovereign. Make sense? All right, so there's this crazy statue, and the statue is pretty interesting. It's a statue of a man, and at the top is a head of gold. And then as you go through, the chest is silver, then it becomes, I think, bronze or something else, and then it's a mixture, and then it's iron, and then it's a mixture of iron, clay, and other things, okay? And there's 1,000 interpretations, but generally this is told, Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that this is a picture of kingdoms that will rise and will fall, okay? And the statue is pretty interesting because it starts with gold, and gold is a brilliant, beautiful metal, and it has some very unique properties. But one thing about gold, if you're trying to build something very strong, you do not pick gold. Gold is very malleable. It's compared to other metals, it's very soft. It doesn't resist well. So you go down to silver. Silver is a little bit less expensive, but it is stronger. It resists corrosion better. It's generally a better metal to use for a lot of things, but it's still not very strong. It's very malleable as well. So then you come down to bronze. Bronze is hardened. It will stand up to everything, okay? And you keep going down, and then you get to iron. So what you see is a statue where the metals get less precious, but they get stronger as you go down, okay? And then from there, in this story, and the statue, as Nebuchadnezzar looks at it, a chunk is carved out of the middle, extracted, and then destroys the entire statue, bringing it to dust, and then that little chunk takes in all that dust and becomes a gigantic mountain on top of it. Okay, that's his dream. And we're not given an exhaustive understanding of what that dream means, but you can say this: that chunk was carved out of the statue without hands. What does that mean? What does without hands mean?
It's supernatural. It's
Okay.
It's done by God.
done by God. Yeah.
Because if you go back into Genesis, and you're very early on, Abraham builds an altar, and what does he do? There's this very specific term they use. He takes rocks and he makes an altar. He doesn't say that he stacked them anyway. He doesn't say that he chipped them anyway. Why not? Because anything that you make is as good as who? You. He just takes the rocks the way that God made them, and that was his altar. This stone was cut out of the statue without hands. It was just the way that God wanted it, just the way that he made it. This is his doing. And he takes this chunk and he destroys this entire statue. And that statue was what? The rise and fall of glorious, amazing nations. Some people consider this to be Babylon, Medo-Persia, Rome, and then Greece, and then Rome. It could be a lot of things. It could be the United States, the toes, whatever, it matters. It's the nations of the world that have ruled the known world, and they are all being destroyed and gathered up and then completely put under the rock that God carved out himself.
Jesus Christ.
The King of Kings. Does that make sense? That's the picture. That's the picture. That God will rule. And all the nations of the world. And it's interesting, we're talking thousands of years of history in that statue, if we understand it properly. God just looks at it as one statue. He looks at it as one people. Remember we talked about God being outside of time. He doesn't necessarily look at it as thousands of years of doings. He looks at it as one thing that he's putting together. And he wipes them out. Now, you, O Nebuchadnezzar, are the King of Kings. You are the head of gold. Okay? To you has been given all these things, right? For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. So Nebuchadnezzar was in a special place. Why? Why was Nebuchadnezzar in a special place? Because he was at the top. Keep going. Ultimately, why was Nebuchadnezzar special? Because God made him, not just let him, made him to be. For Nebuchadnezzar to take charge in Babylon was not just a random thing. He just didn't appear and all of a sudden he's king, right? He's got to go win battles. He's got to defeat the Assyrians. He's got to defeat all these other countries. He's got to avoid getting killed himself as he leads into battle. Right? He's got to effectively maintain this lead, and then he's got to start doing things that a king that has to do to be able to become just more than just a general. All these things were of God's sovereign design. You, Nebuchadnezzar, are this king of gold. God has given all these things into your hand. But here's the thing. For God to give them into his hand, what does God have to have? The power to do so. All these things have to be his to give them to Nebuchadnezzar. Otherwise, it becomes an IOU. Right? That's like my kids promising that they're going to pay me back for whatever they're buying. It's an IOU. Because then we go look at their bank accounts and realize that they're... their allowance ain't going to cover this one. Which is okay, because they're not that old yet. All right? So he changes the kings and the times. And so from what we can see is that this stone without hands, cut without hands, will destroy all these things. But in the meantime, Nebuchadnezzar is made into the head of gold. Okay, so what can we get from this story? Tell me about what that tells us about God. Why is God teaching this lesson to Nebuchadnezzar? part of a continuing story. We're going to look at chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4. What is a lesson that we can get out of this particular story? That's excellent. His sovereignty. This was not a trick question.
Did Nebuchadnezzar even realize that it was God that gave him all the power?
Did he realize it before this? Nope.
Yeah.
So what has he now been taught? He'll conveniently forget, but what has he now been taught? That his power is derived. He has power because God gave him power. Not his God, the God of Israel gave him the power. Okay? So God delegates, even though he is a sovereign, he delegates to men. So that's one thing.
Is that when he was dealing with Daniel? When Daniel... No, that was King Darius. That was Daniel and Lions.
That's Darius. Mm-hmm.
So did Nebuchadnezzar realize before God, struck him and made him insane and sent
Yeah,
him?
we'll get there. Okay. So
From
the story that we just talked about, this is a pagan king. He has no understanding of Yahweh up until this point.
So he thought it was his God
Of course.
that gave him the power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. His strength, his might. In fact, what do we see in the statue that he builds for himself?
That he makes himself the head is good.
That he believes that he is God and therefore worthy of worship. That's the statue.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay? But I want to get there in a second. But what do we learn here? First, that Nebuchadnezzar is given his power by God. But what did that statue also tell us? What do you think?
That God can take it away.
That God can take it away. More than that, what's going to happen? This is a prophetic dream. This is what will happen. Nebuchadnezzar, God will raise things up and he will bring things down. Okay? There's a statue. What happened in the end?
God did what he said he'd do.
Uh-huh.
And it crumbled down to the ground.
How? Because the stone that was cut without hands took it out, hit the statue, brought it to dust, and then what happened to that stone? That was God's stone. It became a mountain. It ruled over everything. It absorbed everything. So what does that tell you about God's ultimate plan?
Everything is being designed and set up for the return of Jesus Christ, for his son, for the glory of Jesus.
For God's rule.
All of
Yeah.
it.
If you want to be more specific, yes. But for our picture, what Yahweh is teaching Nebuchadnezzar is you have power right now because I gave you power. But that won't last forever. My rule is the only thing that will last forever and ever. Okay? And that's a great lesson for us as we're sitting there looking at Trump, and Obama, and Clinton, and all the other nonsense that happens on CNN. I almost can't watch it. I hear stories about it because one of the guys I work with always keeps CNN up on, or C-SPAN or CNN, up on his wall while he works, and so he'll tell me stuff when I call him throughout the day. Did you hear about what happened? So-and-so just fired the chief of staff. And I'm like, I can't do it. I just can't do it. But as you start looking at this circle, you've got to remember where this is all leading. Okay? His rule is supreme. He will win. Right? Ken said, I looked at the back of the book. I know who wins. Okay? And that's what he's trying to teach Nebuchadnezzar. You are not sovereign by yourself. I am. You're just enjoying the fruits. The delegated fruits for the time being. Okay? Now, Nebuchadnezzar says this. The king answered Daniel and said, Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. So, he has discussed a statue. He has discussed a stone made without hands that destroys the entire thing and that ultimately he will win. And what does Nebuchadnezzar take out of that entire interpretation? I'm the head of gold, and your God can do what? Truly, your God is God of gods. First of all, whose God is it? Daniel's. Is it Nebuchadnezzar's? No. Should it be Nebuchadnezzar's?
Yeah.
Yep. Is your God, is God of gods. What does that mean?
And
Nope.
he's ruling over his God.
He's ruling over his God. Is he saying that he is the God? No. He's saying you are God of gods. You are higher in rank than all the other ones. Right? And guess who is also becoming a God? Nebuchadnezzar, in his own estimation. Okay? Your God is God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets. So basically, what is he giving credit to God for? How much credit is he giving God?
Just a little bit more than his God.
Yes. Your God is pretty impressive, Daniel. I got to give you that. That's what he gets out of this lesson. Right? And so what we see in the next chapter is he hears the head of gold, and all of a sudden, guess what he decides to do? Well, if I'm the head of gold, that means that Yahweh has told me I'm pretty impressive. I'm something. So I'm going to build a statue out of gold, and I'm going to make an edict that everyone should come and worship me. And why not? God just told me that I'm something, that I am something special. So I'm going to build a statue. And we all know the story from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And we also know the story from Rack, Shack, and Benny. Right? VeggieTales. Has everyone seen this? It's one of the best episodes. It really is. The bunny song, and it's fantastic. All the songs are singable. I taught them to my kids. I actually brought them up on YouTube now that they're old enough, and they just look at me funny. But then they go along and they sing the songs with him. So that was great. And they're all like teenagers. Okay. So he builds a statue. So we can stop here and pick it up next week, or we can continue on and finish this chapter. What do you guys feel like? Does anyone have stuff they got to get to? I'm fine either way. I don't care. Okay. We'll keep going. So he builds a statue and says everyone needs to come and do it. And he makes it, now this is important, he makes it an edict. Why does that matter? What is an edict?
Do or die. An edict is, there's no choice in the matter. You have to show up.
An edict is a declaration from whom? Why does when does an edict matter? If I make an edict to all of you that you should buy me lunch,
There's no choice in it.
you have that choice because I made it, because I cannot do what? I can't back it up. There's no consequences for you violating my edict. Make sense?
Okay, so it's not, so
An-
am I misunderstanding?
An
it?
edict is only as good as the backing.
Okay.
Everybody makes edicts, right? One of the things I couldn't stand about Obama the most, and now Trump's unfortunately taking it up too, he issued the most executive orders, more executive orders than any other president, and included declaring all the illegal immigrants not illegal anymore, right? So what was he doing? He was bypassing Congress, making his own laws and passing them off just because that's what he wanted to do.
Obama was king.
Yeah. Edicts from the king. It drove me crazy. Why? Because I'm an American, and gosh darn it, I have my rights. This is not the way we work. We have 3 branches of government, yada, yada, yada. That's not biblical, just so you know. Democratic systems are not biblical when it comes to God. Okay? There's only one ruler, there's only one king, and there's only one ruler who's allowed to make absolute edicts in all things. Everybody else's edicts need to follow the king's edicts. Okay? But that doesn't stop Nebuchadnezzar. He makes an edict that says everybody needs to come and they need to worship the statue. You need to come and make much of me. Right? And then it comes to, so they look around, and sure enough, there's 3 Hebrew boys that refuse to do so. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, also known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They refuse to bow down. And so they're brought before Nebuchadnezzar, and remember, these boys have been given fruits, they've been given teaching, they've been given everything by Nebuchadnezzar, by his staff. They've been taught. He's been in their courts. They've probably eaten with him. And so he brings them and he says, what have I not done for you? Why have you not listened to this? Why are you against me? And this is what they answer in Daniel 3:15. But if you do not worship, this is what he says to them, if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Who is the God that has the ability, the capability, the bravery? Who among the gods can stand up to me? And this is their answer, which is remarkably, amazingly wise. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. That is fantastic. I do not need to defend my God before you. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. We have no doubt. He can overrule everything. But if not, let it be known to you, O king. Okay, this is very, very important, those three words. But if not. Okay, our king can deliver us. But if he does not, because what are they saying about their king? He has the ability to choose what? Whether or not to deliver. Right? It is his choice. Because it's not all about this world, and they knew that. And so they knew that it is his choice to intervene. And we said he's wise. We've already talked about his wisdom. If he chooses not to intervene, then guess what? That was the best course of action. So they trust that he will take the best course of action. Let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Our God is sovereign, and we know he will make the best decision, and we completely trust, as you said, we completely trust in his power, his wisdom, and his ability. And if he will completely deliver us, and he will deliver us in the end. Even if he doesn't deliver us from this immediate trial, we have full confidence in the end. Does that make sense? Just keep going over this one. This one's fantastic. That is such a wise response from boys that are probably in their teens. I've got a lot more years than these men, and I couldn't come up with an answer like that. They had so much grace, and they had so much wisdom. Okay. So, who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? So he stokes up the furnaces. We're not told what the furnaces are for. Archaeologically, there was doubts about whether this was actually true. Then they actually found furnaces in Babylon, and they realized, oh my gosh, that's, go figure. That was actually accurate. They were probably used for some kind of pottery, or they could also be used for fuel. Babylon was very advanced. So these furnaces could have been used for fuel, which means they probably found some sorts of coal. Coal is extremely energy efficient. And so basically when he says stoke up the fires, he's saying throw in a few extra shovels of coal. And it just keeps getting hotter and hotter and hotter. So hot that the people that were throwing these boys into the furnace, they supposedly died just from the radiative heat. They throw them, and likely it's probably, if you watched VeggieTales, it's actually a little closer. They were probably thrown in from the top. They weren't just shoved in from the side. And what would have happened is they would have dropped the fuel in from the top, and then they have a side entrance into the furnace that they could go in and clean when it cools down things. So that's what they were looking into when they said look inside. So these men are dropped into this furnace, and all of a sudden they look inside, and Nebuchadnezzar was astonished because he says to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered, yeah, true. Okay. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. And we're not going to go into all the implications of this, but understand these men were dropped into a physically, humanly impossible situation. They should have been burnt up to a crisp in a matter of seconds. And yet they're actually in the furnace, walking around. And what's really special, God is with them in the furnace. You think these boys actually wanted to come out of the furnace? They were fearful going in, naturally. And then once they're in, what do they want to do? Stay. This is probably Jesus Christ, pre-incarnate, walking with them, fellowshipping with them, encouraging them. They're enjoying their time. He's walking with them like Adam walked with God in the garden. He's walking with them, enjoying it. Does that make sense? So they're walking in the furnace with all these men. And Nebuchadnezzar cannot believe this. He thought he was so powerful. What God will deliver you from my hands. As these men walk out of the furnace completely unscathed, guess what was just answered? The God of Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. That's your answer, Nebuchadnezzar. You thought you were that powerful, but guess what? There's something more. Okay, so let's look at Nebuchadnezzar's response again. Actually, no, let's get lessons from this one. What lessons can we learn from the furnace about God's sovereignty?
That even though the king had his desire, God was still ruling.
God overrules. Even more, God overrules not only the king's decision, what else can he overrule? Nature. All the things that we think are beyond our control, guess what? God says, let's see, I know how these chemical reactions and everything is supposed to work. Not this time. The whole idea of the sun not moving while Moses kept his hands up, not a problem. The sun moving backwards for Hezekiah, not a problem. To God, these things are not problems because he rules over them. They are obeying him just as much as we are. And so he stops this, and he can overrule earthly authorities, nature, and everything else. What else do we see about this? And this was in their response. What was their response? What does it tell us about God? Right. He chooses to intervene when he chooses to intervene. It is his choice. He can do so at the right time, and he knows his people. Now, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word, and yielded their bodies, and they should not serve or worship any god except their own God." Great, thank you. "Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language who speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses made into an ash heap, because there is no God who can deliver like this." Perfect. Now where are we at with Nebuchadnezzar? Your God was pretty impressive, Daniel, I have to admit. Now we've got something new.
Yeah, he's no longer the God of gods. He's God.
He's got that. He is the only one that can deliver like this. "And I, Nebuchadnezzar, make a decree."
That he is agreeing that I'm not sure I can say it, but he's now, by making that decree, he's now saying, okay, now with my own authority, I now agree with this authority,
right.
And so then therefore I make it what I say is true.
Right. I have declared what is true. It is my decree that everyone should worship this God. He is worthy of worship. I have made a decree that I, Nebuchadnezzar, am protecting the glory of this God. I have decided of my own glory, of my own power, of my own firm edict, that this God is worthy to be worshipped. That's essentially what he comes up with. He is the protector of God's glory. He is the one that tells you that you should do so. So Nebuchadnezzar has gone from, he's pretty impressive, to, he's worthy of worship, but he's not there yet. And this is what we'll get to in Daniel 4, is now Nebuchadnezzar has to learn, Nebuchadnezzar, my glory is glorious in itself. Not because you recognize it, not because I need you to recognize it, not because you chose me or anything like that. I am God, and you should worship me. Period. Done. I am the king. You are not. And that's the lesson that Nebuchadnezzar still has to learn. And that is, in a nutshell, the lesson that each Christian has to learn as they come to the cross. That there is a God that we are responsible for. That he is the Savior of the world, and there is no hope outside of this king. And we are to come as people. Okay? So that's the lesson that we're going to learn. Next week, we'll get into Daniel 4, and then we'll continue on through the rest of the chapter. Questions, thoughts as we finish up? No, I'm sorry, keeping you late. It's tough.